Welcome to CLI's Legal Generative AI Summit 2023. I'm Terry Modishead. I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I'll be your host for this session. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in all the places on which we meet for the summit today. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples joining this session. We also acknowledge and welcome all First Nations people from every country joining us for this session. And on behalf of Jordan, who is coming to us from Ottawa, Canada, we would in particular like to acknowledge that he is speaking from the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe peoples. Thank you very much indeed, Jordan. It's wonderful to see you here. The session is Law Unlimited. Welcome to the re-envisioned legal profession. It's really hard to imagine anyone anywhere better placed to chat about this with us than you, Jordan. As folks will know, Jordan is the Principal of Law 21, and a huge welcome to you, Jordan. So I'm going to go off screen and mute and hand over to you, Jordan. Again, a huge welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Terry, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where this comes, where I'm coming to you right now. It actually is evening here on October 23rd, but it was actually a lovely morning, much like this behind me here in Ottawa, here in the autumn. So I'm very happy to be able to come to you today to share the screen in this fashion. And if that worked well, and hopefully it did, you should now have on your screen Law Unlimited, re-envisioning the legal profession, with a remarkably garish opening image. This image, like all those that you will encounter in the slide deck here today, was created through a generative AI program, appropriately enough. This one's called Midjourney. There are many others. DALL-E, of course, is increasingly popular and powerful from all indications. But I thought it was appropriate to use this as kind of a unifying theme of the transformation that we are, I think, already embarking on here in the legal profession. And generative AI is going to have a whole lot to do with that. In terms of the message I'm hoping to send today, and I've got about 45 minutes, give or take. I'm hoping not to exceed that because I would like to leave some time for questions from you, and which Terry can acquire and moderate. But if you will, the TLDR slide, too long, didn't sit through, that I really kind of sums up what I want to say to you today, is kind of this one here, which is that, look, generative AI, I really think, is going to transform the legal profession. And it's going to do it in a couple of different ways. One of them is the one that I think we are more cognizant of at the moment, or maybe a little more concerned about. It is going to disrupt, and in some ways, I think even destroy, what we used to do as lawyers, as legal professionals. And we will be speaking about that at some length. But equally, and I think even more so, generative AI is also going to create and expand who we can now be as lawyers, as legal professionals. I think it's going to close some doors for us, but it's going to open many more that we weren't even aware were available to us. I think it's going to have that kind of impact before it's all over. And I guess in order to bring that out a little bit further, these are the specific aspects that I'm hoping to talk about today: the disruption and the expansion, these two channels of impact that generative AI is going to produce. A couple of quick caveats here. When I say decline and fall, I'm ripping off, Gibbon and the Roman Empire, and that's kind of a term of art. But that is not to say that we're going to see the end of, say, lawyer effort, or the end of, legal education, whatever the case might be. More that this is a reflection of the fact that either the primacy of these operations and institutions and practices is going to come to decline significantly, or maybe even come to an end altogether. But also, more importantly, as I say, it's this renewal and rise. These are the elements, the counters, I guess you might say, or the flip side to each of these first 6 areas as well. So that is that's kind of the main thing I wanted to mention. And I guess the other complementary point is we are focusing our remarks today and our conversation today purely on generative AI, but it is, of course, by no means the only world-changing experience that we are all going through right now. Obviously, we're also going through massive demographic changes. As the members of the boomer generation are very much in the last decade of their own primacy within the legal profession, and we are going to see waves of especially millennial lawyers and eventually Generation Z or Z lawyers come into the profession. That is going to have extraordinary impact on how law firms in particular are structured. We're also seeing, of course, changes in the nature of the workplace. It is no longer everybody showing up at the office all day, every day the week. We are now in the hybrid, the remote, the we don't know yet what to call it workplace era. And there's also gestures at everything else going on in the world today. So very much do not think that this is just generative AI on its own is going to bring about all this change. I think it's going to be a major driver, but it will not by any means be the only one. It's going to kind of dovetail together. As if we didn't have enough to worry about on one aspect, we got all these different sort of tsunamis heading towards us at the same time. A delightful thought, but one that we can kind of take with us, hopefully, going forward. All right, enough preliminaries. Let's jump into this. Let's start off with the one that I think we tend to focus the most on these days. As I say, we are concerned, and I guess understandably so as lawyers, about what will the advance of generative AI mean for us. I have been asked a number of times, I expect you have probably had conversations around this as well, or heard them, the question of, is generative AI going to replace lawyers? I will tell you the short answer to that question is no. The long answer to that question is no, it's really not. It's not going to replace lawyers any more than the very first hammer, the day it was invented, replaced the builder who held it. It is a tool. Generative AI is an extraordinary tool, certainly the most amazing technological events I have seen in my time. It is going to change the way we practice law, but it is still only a tool. It is going to amplify. It is going to augment. It will be a remarkable force multiplier for our productivity. But at this end of the day, we will still have lawyers working in some capacity with this tool. Now, again, keep in mind, if you had said to that very first builder, okay, now you're going to take that hammer away and never use it again, that builder would say, no, not a chance, right? I need that hammer, right? I'm tired of pounding nails with my fist. This is not fun, right? And I think that the same will run true with generative AI at a certain point. And my guess is that certainly within the next 10 years, generative AI will be so integrated into the everyday life of what we do as lawyers, and honestly, in a lot of ways, in what we do in society, that it would never occur to us to try practicing without it. The closest comparison I can give you would be to the internet. If I were to say to all of you later on today or tomorrow, whenever you sit back down at your desk to do work, you can't use the internet anymore to practice law, you would say, that's crazy. I of course I need the internet. I need email. I need the web. I need this and this. All right. And this is where we're heading, I believe, is that kind of absolutely essential, but in a lot of ways assumed. We're not even going to think about it in a lot of respects. So that's great. Now, the difficulty, though, is that the route to get there is not going to be free of disruption. The primary regard in which we will notice this, of course, is in generative AI's power to compress or accelerate the amount of time and effort required in order to complete any given legal task. Generative AI is a remarkable machine for the creation, the generation, the revision of anything to do with words, language, documents, or what have you. And this constitutes a significant percentage of the time and effort that lawyers spend. And so work that would have taken lawyers, what takes to lawyers right now, say 3 hours to do, with the use of generative AI, pretty soon it's going to take a couple of hours, or maybe 50 minutes, and at some point 15. And at some point, it'll be a matter of seconds. And we are going to find ourselves as lawyers with a lot more time on our hands. This is going to be very difficult for us to deal with, I think, at first. Our instinct will be to go try to get more such work, to fill that gap, fill the time. And we'll try to get more of the work that has been consumed in this way, but generative AI, I believe, is going to become increasingly powerful, and going to get more of this kind of work will be a little bit like chasing the setting sun. It will be diminishing returns in a very short period of time. Now, again, that's the downside. That's that left-hand column. Keep in mind, of course, that there will also be a lot of bonuses, a lot of augmentation of creative tasks, all those items I mentioned there in that slide. In fact, we don't even know yet all the ways in which generative AI can assist us in our higher value capacity as lawyers. But I think we are going to find out. And I think there is where we're not only going to find the more productive and more profitable uses of generative AI, we're going to find the more interesting, the more engaging, and frankly, the more fun. This is where we're heading, I think. This is what we need to get ourselves around to. It's this idea of higher value services being almost the default setting for what we do as lawyers. As legal professionals, we tend to be what I call downstream, right? The client, whether this is a company or an individual or an institution, up here, and it's got all sorts of issues, what have you, and they result in problems that kind of flow downhill to us at the bottom. And we're the fixers and we're the problem solvers, and we do this and we do that, and we kind of wrap it all up. I believe that flow of problems to be solved and issues to be addressed is going to start to dry up somewhat. And as a result, we are going to find ourselves saying, how can we engage ourselves in ways that are more meaningful, the ways that are more profitable? We are going to start heading upstream. Rather than it being reactive and waiting for problems to manifest themselves so we can solve them, we will go upstream to the client and say, how can we help you to address these problems in the first place? We couldn't do this as well beforehand because we were swamped with all the stuff you were throwing down river at us. But now we have the time, we have the bandwidth, and we have a tool here which is extraordinarily good at helping us to reflect and come up with ideas. So this is the opportunity that waits for us here. I know that Mary Carroll was talking in the session before me about how generative AI represents a great moment of opportunity. And this is a perfect example of that, to redouble our efforts to go to lawyers, understand their core issues and their needs, and find out how can we serve you best in this fashion. Law firms, the business model has more or less dictated this, have traditionally been volume businesses, which is why we spend so much time billing hours and bringing in work and so forth, because this is how we make our money. One lawyer doing one service at one time for one client. And that does not scale. It never has. We're going to find ways to scale using technology, but not restricted to generative AI, in order for us to be able to provide more services to a client at one time, or services to more than one client at one time. There's a lot of talk, as we know, about, it's traditionally called run the company, bet the company work. I use client here because, again, not everybody here serves companies. But the idea is that there's the basic everyday work, which just kind of has to get done from time to time. And there's the bet the company work. That's the bet the client. That is where everything is riding on this. And lawyers tend to really enjoy this because it is high stakes and very remunerative. And it's the most exciting, gets your blood pumping as a lawyer. I think we're going to see, thanks to generative AI in particular, the emergence of grow the client work, grow the company work. Rather than spending all of our time solving problems, we go to them to say, how can we help you achieve your goals as a person, as a family, as a small business, as an entrepreneur, as a company or an institution or a corporation? That, I think, writ very broadly, is the opportunity that AI is going to create for us. Now, let's drill down into some of those aspects a little bit more. The one area where I think we will see the earliest and most significant impact of generative AI is in the long-standing practice of associate leverage. This, of course, is essentially the basis of the law firm pyramid. The whole idea has been that if you are a lawyer who has more work than they can accomplish at any given time, then you hire another lawyer who can carry some of this work out for you, and you pay them for less than you bill their work out for. That is essentially that's the leverage model. That's how law firms have been making money for nigh on decades, and honestly, well over 100 years now. And the problem with that approach, and it's great in theory, and it's made many law firms a very lucrative business model. What happens, however, when you start running short on the kind of work you can give to associates, especially to new ones, especially new lawyers who are coming in, for the most part, very low skilled or unskilled, quite inexperienced. The kind of work we have traditionally given them, which is the absolute basic entry level stuff: write a memo, do legal research, review these documents, mark up this contract, whatever the case might be. That is work that's going to be the first thing fed into the generative AI machine. That work is, in many respects, the foundation of the traditional law firm profitability model. And when that work goes, we're going to have to come up with something to replace it. Because among other things, it's going to also create a threat to the very purpose of associates. If you as a law firm, you know that you can, if let's say traditionally you would hire, make up a number here, 10 associates, knowing that in 10 years' time, one or two of them will become equity partners and the rest will have left through attrition during that time. If you can't generate profits from the efforts of these lawyers for those intervening years, you're not going to hire them. From a purely economic point of view, you will hire only as many associates as you need to replace or your current equity partners, or to grow the firm at a moderately sustainable rate. So that is a worry that I have, honestly. It's a worry for anybody who's thinking about going into law school or is in law school. Maybe not right now. I don't think these are changes we're going to see necessarily in the next couple of years, but I do think we are heading for the end of associate leverage. So the good news, I think, however, is that this opens up an opportunity for us to think differently about what I call professional productivity. Very intentional use of the words here. First of all, professional, not just legal. Not going to get into it very much here today, but we are very rapidly moving into the era when the people who provide value in law firms, who are able to send work, do work that clients will pay for, are not just lawyers. And therefore this isn't a problem in some enlightened parts of the world where you folks are located, other parts of the world it is, where they can be equity partners, they can be owners. We need to broaden the spectrum of people who are recognized as providing value to our clients in our legal enterprises. Okay. Productivity, more traditionally in law firms, has been defined in a very simple way. How many hours do you bill? We are already seeing in the course of this discussion how that approach is going to start running dry. If you could get work done faster and faster, it stops making sense for you to be able to just keep on billing your time. So what we need to do in the law is start adopting the more traditional, if you will, industry definition of productivity, which is essentially the effort to outcome ratio, or the bang for your buck. How much output, how much outcome, how many results can you generate with a minimum commitment of resources? This is going to be the new challenge. It is going to be a challenge, among other things, to the ways in which law firms make money and the ways in which lawyers spend their time. I don't want to underestimate how challenging a transition that's going to be, but I do think it's where we're heading. Again, the positive aspect to this to me is that it will also make collaboration far more important and far more valuable, because when you move upstream, when you get right to the heart of the matrix of where clients' biggest issues and most concerning problems are located, they are incredibly complex. They are wicked problems, as the saying goes. And one lawyer, I don't care how hardworking or brilliant that lawyer might be, is not going to be able to handle that alone. You need a broad, diversified selection of professionals with all kinds of different experiences and perspectives to bring to bear with that. You need a team approach to be able to tackle these kind of very highest value problems and opportunities. And that, I think, is where we're going to see law firms head as well. Again, not tomorrow or the next day, but hopefully in the relatively near future. Let's talk about that everyone's favorite elephant in the room, the billable hour. I get asked again as well, when will the billable hour die? My answer on this now is that the billable hour will die shortly after the sun goes nova. It is going to be with us for quite a long time. I've stopped worrying about that too much. I actually do think there is a place and an opportunity and a time when the billable hour is an appropriate mechanism for the pricing of legal work. But it's important to understand where the billable hour came from. The billable hour itself is essentially a value proxy. If you were to ask your average client who brings a problem or an opportunity to a lawyer, how much is this worth to you? The client simply doesn't know. I suppose if the client is suing or being sued for $50,000, okay, we know how much that's worth, but that is the relatively rare exception. It's difficult to put a monetary value on any particular task. It's going to vary according to the client, the circumstances, the situation, whatever the case might be. So, and if you ask the lawyer doesn't have any more of a clue. So we kind of revert to this proxy. We go back to our very old instinctive understanding that the harder you work on something and the longer you work on something is a generally accurate reflection of how much value or worth is contained in that action. It's an industrial era. It's pre-industrial definition, but it's the one we've been using in law for a long time. Because I believe generative AI is going to so radically deviate the amount of time it takes to do something from the value of the output that is created, I think that value proxy stops working. I think lawyers suddenly find that if they bill their time, they're getting underpaid. They are getting undervalued, perhaps even more so than they are right now. So again, I don't think we're going to see the billable hour disappear, but it will become less popular, not with clients, but with lawyers. And that's going to be a very interesting development. Now, I'm willing to give some time a day to the idea of the billable hour as a pricing mechanism. I am not a fan and never have been a fan of the billable hour as a compensation piece in order to reward people for the amount, you give people more money the longer hours they work. Among other things, that has always been a block to innovation and to true productivity and efficiency in law firms. It is also one of the big reasons why there is such an absolute crisis of wellness across every jurisdiction in law firms in the legal profession. I am hopeful that we will also see a shift in how we compensate lawyers away from time and effort. What will replace, if we do end up having to replace the billable hour as the generally referred method of pricing, what will replace it? Well, here's the thing. I talk to lawyers, I talk to law firms, and I say, what's the aspect you value the most out of dealing with your clients? And as often as not, more often than not, the answer is, I really value the relationship I build with my client. It's great to have that relationship of trust, of mutual trust and accountability, and knowing that we're doing something good for them and they value my work and they respect my work. And when you talk to clients, they will say the same thing. What I really want is a trusted advisor, someone that I can go to for advice and someone who'll stand up for me and so forth. The key element to the lawyer-client duopoly, if you will, is the relationship. So why don't we think about maybe starting to position pricing around that? What is the relationship worth? Now, if you're in the line of work where you only do one type of work one time for one client, if it's by its very nature iterative or one-off, then okay, maybe it's a little more difficult. But a lot of lawyers and a lot of law firms do have regular clients. I think it's time for us to think about how we price that, to say, okay, you're going to pay us a set amount every quarter or every year. The advantage for you, client, is that you have predictability in your legal spend. The advantage for us is that we have guaranteed income flow and we can start making plans and hiring and building out because we have that level of reliability. So if you've got a question, if you've got a particular issue comes up, don't worry about picking up the phone. Many clients are reluctant to pick up the phone and call their lawyer because they know as soon as the lawyer answers, they're on the meter, and a simple yes or no could cost them dozens or scores or hundreds of dollars. If we start moving away from that, if we lower that barrier, if you will, to clients relying upon us, we can start really building out relationships. And then if something comes up that is novel or particularly unique or high value, okay, maybe we can talk about a different structure for that. Maybe we build that by the hour, or we go to our data and find out what similar type of retainers from the past have cost. All I'm saying is that the more we talk to our clients and they talk with us and we have conversations about this, not only the closer we'll get to a real value paradigm in pricing, the deeper the relationships are going to get. And that's where we want to go to. Move away from transactional relationships between lawyers and clients and deepen that level of trust. I have spoken at some length here about generative AI coming into the law firm and doing away with a lot of the entry-level work that lawyers have traditionally done. I think this is a real threat to the ability of law firms to make money by leveraging the labor of their associates. But there's something else which is under threat here as well, which is that this is traditionally how we have trained lawyers in law firms. I use train here with the air quotes because it isn't really training. no more than, tossing someone into a pond to say learn how to swim is teaching them how to swim, right? But this is how law firms have traditionally gone about it. More or less, you bring in these very low skilled, unskilled individuals, and you say, we're not going to actually train you in any very structured or formalistic sense. We're going to get you doing work that is pretty much at the level of skill that you're able to accomplish. And you're going to do this for years. And by osmosis, by absorbing, you'll get the hang of it. You'll figure it out. And this is eventually how most of us did learn how to become lawyers. But it's incredibly inefficient. It's quite traumatic in the first levels. And it's not, as I say, training. Well, whether that was good or whether it was bad, I think it's going to start going away as well. Because what can you immerse people in, right? Again, if I can continue the metaphor, if the downstream work is starting to dry up, then the pool of work at the bottom into which we have tossed our new lawyers is going to start drying up as well. It'll be too shallow for us to do that. I'm very proud of that metaphor. I'm going to file that one away for future reference. So, all right, what does that mean? What are we going to do about this now? Well, I've been giving presentations to law firms recently. I've had 3 now in the last 4 weeks. And I, at each stop, have said, why did we ever think it was a good idea for us to train, to immerse new lawyers in this experience when we could actually train them? We are in a much more advanced era of true professional development now. We understand much better how adults learn, how professionals can acquire skills. There's a number of courses in the private sector. There's a number of institutional systems, especially through bar admission courses. We have a couple of very interesting ones here in Canada that are very systematically teaching and training new lawyers on all the aspects of how to practice law and how to be a professional lawyer. Why don't we start thinking about that? That is where I think we're going to have to start heading very soon. Again, to me, it's an opportunity. We can start to accelerate the development of lawyers. It is long overdue. We have not done a good job of this. I said we don't train, we don't supervise very well. There's a wonderful book written back in 2020 by an Australian professor, Michael McNamara, called Supervision in the Legal Profession. If you haven't come across it, I'd recommend you pick it up. It's not a long read, but it's very well reasoned, very well researched, and it's really had a major effect on the kind of advice I'm giving to regulators and bar admission authorities. And among Professor McNamara's observations, he says, good supervision has 3 dimensions. It is normative, formative, and restorative. Normative is the correcting, the instruction of how to do things properly. Formative is about the mentoring. You're helping to build a professional. And restorative is helping these new lawyers navigate the personal and emotional impact of this very difficult transition from the educational sphere to the practice sphere. That is what actual scientifically backed training and development looks like. We, for the most part, don't do anything remotely like this in the law. It is very much past time we started. Now we have the opportunity to do this. The lawyers are coming into our firms. They are not for a while. Are they going to be any more skilled than they are right now? We have to take the job on anyway as lawyers and law firms. Let's do it right. Let's say, instead of just throwing you into this basic work, we are going to create a structured program by which you will learn how to be a lawyer. You're going to learn about all of the aspects of being a good professional, and we're going to open up all the options available to you. This whole idea of the partnership track is long since, as far as I'm concerned, past its best before date. This idea that you're a partner or you're a non-partner or you're out and that's it. This kind of dichotomy is not useful to anybody. We need to find new roles for lawyers to fill. We need to find ways to turn lawyers to accelerate their development, such that if you had a really effective system like this, if you were not only training and developing your lawyers, but you were exposing them to client situations, first hypothetical, then simulated, then real with supervision, then 3 years into their time in your firm, they will be vastly ahead in terms of their maturity, in terms of their ability, and in terms of their productivity than an equivalent 3rd year at another firm. And at the end of 5 years, you absolutely have a reasonable, legitimate candidate for admission to partnership. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't take advantage of the fact we have these openings, we have these opportunities. Let's make the most of them. I am a major proponent of DEI, not just the diversity, but the equity and the inclusion. The one thing I add here for law firms, because I think some law firms really get this, a number of law firms have a general sense, and a number of law firms remain kind of clueless. And I want to make clear to them, the generation that's coming into law firms right now, both the earliest, youngest ones who are there now, and I guarantee you the ones coming for the next 10, 15, 20 years, take this issue extremely seriously. And if they believe that your law firm is just paying lip service to it, or if they see that your website DEI statement says one thing and the ranks of the lawyers and especially the equity partnership firm says another, they will recognize the hypocrisy, and you will not get a sniff from this generation in terms of their interest in working for you. It used to be a way in which you could gain an advantage over other law firms. I strongly believe that is now essentially table stakes. So I would happily talk to you all day about DEI, but I did want to make that point to you right now while we have this opportunity. All right, a couple of more ancillary areas or related areas that I think are worth talking about here. Legal education. I am not a fan of the current system of legal education. I'm hardly alone in that. But it's not just legal education. Educators in all areas, virtually from the elementary level upwards, are extremely disturbed by generative AI. And some of them recognize that an era has ended. We will no longer have homework the way that you and I had homework. We will no longer have essay questions as take-home work. That day, I think, is coming to a swift end. We don't yet know what generative AI is going to do to education, other than that is going to force us really quickly to come up with new ways to accomplish what we're trying to do. And at the same time, ask ourselves some important questions like, what exactly are we trying to do? Why are we still educating students the way we were educating them shortly before the Second World War? What sense does this make? What is the purpose of education? Fascinating questions, well beyond the scope of our time here today. But a similar question has to be and will be asked in legal education. What are we training and teaching lawyers to be and to do? I'm working with regulators here in Canada, talking about entry-level competence frameworks and standards. I wrote a report for one of the law societies here, and 6 months after that report was submitted, ChatGPT 4 came out, and I looked at that and said, I may have to change my recommendations. It's that important, because generative AI is going to change what lawyers do. As a result, we have to change legal education and lawyer licensure. There's no point in us trying to prepare lawyers for careers that aren't going to exist, to teach them and test them on skills and tasks that they're probably not going to perform. What lawyers are going to do, our best guess at this time, they will push harder towards solving problems, but also preventing problems, adding value and identifying value, forming relationships of depth and trust and mutual reliance and respect. This is what we need to start teaching lawyers to do. This is what we need to start assessing people who wish to become lawyers at the licensure stage. We're going to have to rethink what we mean by competence and what it is, again, we are hoping to accomplish by running people through this system. This is going to be a real, I mean, what we're coming up on is going to be tough for law firms. I think for law schools within 10 years, I think it's going to be a situation of extreme chaos. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I don't think it's going to be fun for them. Law firms have been a volume business for quite some time. I guarantee you law schools are almost nothing but a volume business. They need people to come in and pay their tuition to take their courses and graduate. If there is a real crisis of hiring in law firms over the course of the next few years, driven in part by generative AI, that's going to have an impact on law schools. And here comes the actual challenge to our approach to teaching and what we're getting people to become as lawyers, to finish the job off. So law schools, happy to chat with you, but there's a lot coming your way. What I think we should be thinking about more is lawyer formation. This is what we're actually trying to do, right? We're trying to form lawyers. We are trying to bring people from a point of, hey, I think I might like to be a lawyer someday, to I am a professional, competent, confident, independent practitioner on whom clients can rely. Now, I don't know how long you think that process takes anybody. I think it is, for me, minimum 7 to 8 years to run that particular gamut. It can be longer, it can be a little bit shorter, but it is certainly not something that you can do in 3 years and if you're here in Canada or somewhere else, a year of apprenticeship and then jumping right in. We need to rethink how we form lawyers. We need to rethink, again, the skills that we're giving them, the tasks we expect them to do, the roles we expect them to fill, and the functions that they're going to be performing. In addition, this is the time for us to broaden the scope of what we actually introduce lawyers to. It drives me nuts in many respects that lawyer licensing pays hardly any attention to issues like what's the public interest in law? How do lawyers serve that? What is your obligation as a lawyer to fulfill the public interest? What does the focus on the client actually mean in practice? How do you make the time and the bandwidth in your daily work to be able to make sure the client remains a significant focus of your work? Being well, staying well, extremely difficult to do. How do you manage the hybrid relationships that we're all going to be having, and so on and so forth? Professional awareness, at least as important, I think, as professional responsibility. These are all things new lawyers need to know. They do learn them in the first 3 or 5 or 7 years of practice, but they learn them, generally speaking, by experience, by trial and error, and usually through the school of hard knocks. We can do better than that. And I believe that with the disruption generative AI is bringing to the lawyer education formation process, now is a perfect time to make time on the agenda for that particular deliverable. And the last couplet I want to talk to you today about is starts with access to justice, which again, I have placed in quotation marks because I'm actually not a big fan of the term. And my problem with it isn't with the word justice, it's with word access. I think we have been led astray by our focus on access. And the reason for this is think about all the ways in which you would use the word access in daily life or in any kind of capacity. You'd use it for like an access panel, an access hatch, an access tube, right? Access basically being some kind of portal to find a way to get something which is difficult to reach or difficult to locate, right? It is not, no one calls the front door to your house access, right? Access is something that it's a little panel behind an old stairwell somewhere down in your basement or your attic. We call the front door an entrance. Why do we never talk about entrance to justice, right? This is my larger point. We have, through, I think, largely inadvertently, but we have created a justice system which is remote. It is external. It is more or less kept far away, out of the reach of most people. It is scarce. It is guarded by gatekeepers who are very expensive. It is functionally only for the privileged in our society, which we know because 85 to 90% of the matters, the potential and actual legal issues and opportunities people have never get anywhere near a lawyer's desk, never get anywhere near a court docket or a tribunal desk. And because we have made law so fundamentally remote and external, we have limited the availability of suppliers who can assist. This is how we wind up talking about access as if we're doing people a favor by giving them access to something to which they are entitled both constitutionally and according to human rights. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'll get down off my soapbox here just for a moment, but to say generative AI, again, has the potential. It's not going to do it all by itself. Again, it is just a tool. We have to use it properly. But there is a potential here for us to use it to take justice away from being an external thing out of your reach to being within your reach, to being almost internal, to put it in your grasp as an individual or a person or a member of our society, to democratize the justice system. We can, for instance, create with generative AI without that much effort in terms of training it on reliable databases, giving it access to carefully curated materials. You can have a system that people could go to, ask it any question, no matter how specific, no matter how detailed, you will get a very useful, sensible answer, an answer that a good second or third year lawyer could provide you. Is that the unauthorized practice of law? Here's my answer. Do I care? I do not, right? I don't know. It is certainly better than nothing. in almost all cases. Assuming we have a system here, which I believe is very workable, that has a high level of degree of competency and a high level of reliability, this is a way in which we can give people access to, sorry, there's that word again, we can allow people the ability to exercise the rights and remedies to which they are entitled under the law. So for me, it's less about access, it is more about empowerment. This is where I think we can go. We have enormously powerful tools at our disposal. We very soon will. Let people use them. Let people navigate their way through the legal system. Let them create new pathways to get the results they want. And perhaps we start building institutions around those new pathways. We don't have to rely on the old assumptions anymore. We don't have to rely on the old institutions anymore. If they still serve us well, great. If they serve us well with some modification, that's terrific as well. I know I am speaking here in very idealistic, slightly revolutionary terms. I get that. But part of this reflects two things. Number one, the scale of the problem that we face in terms of people's ability to avail themselves of the law and to really get justice for themselves and for their needs. And equally, the potentially revolutionary impact that generative AI promises us. As someone I read in the area says, even if generative AI stopped developing tomorrow and it never got any better than it does right now, it would already be the single most powerful engine for legal knowledge that has ever been invented. And it is going to keep evolving, getting forward. We have a crisis of, again, I'll say access because I can't think of another word at the moment. We have a crisis in people's ability to avail themselves of justice. We have a potentially world-changing technology. So if I am speaking in extremely large terms, it's because I think it's an extremely large opportunity that we have here in front of us. Okay. I promised I'd leave some time for questions or discussions at the end. So I will simply close by saying, I really do think we're on the cusp of something big here, or we could be. It is certainly possible that we could miss the opportunity that's being offered to us here. And there's many ways in which we could happen. You could see regulators decide that anything that a machine does is unauthorized practice of law and try to stamp it out. I'll be speaking at a legal regulation conference in Ireland in a few days' time. I'm hoping to throw some water on that idea, but it is certainly something that regulators might do. We might see courts decide to become very jealous of their prerogative and prevent any refuse to approve any settlement or decision reached through the use of generative AI process. Or we could simply sit back and decide as a profession, we'll let someone else deal with it. And before you know it, it'll be Amazon, or it'll be Apple, or it'll be Tesla, or who knows who will come along next, who figures out what they're going to do with this area. Someone is going to apply generative AI to the law. It might as well be the legal profession. It ought to be the legal profession. This is an extraordinary opportunity we have in front of us. If you haven't played with generative AI, and I trust that you have if you're involved in this program, if you have played with it, you know how amazing it can be. You know the potential, even in its infancy, for what it can do. If you haven't, give it a shot. Try all these use cases, come up with your own. Yeah, it's going to be disruptive. It's not going to be a ton of fun to go through necessarily, but it's going to give us, all of us, so much more than it takes away. That's my pitch. That's my belief. That's my presentation. Terry, I'm going to kick it right back to you. And happily for everybody, I will stop talking and I will start listening.
Brilliant presentation, Jordan. Thank you so much. And I find it both inspiring, a little bit scary, but remain a Gen AI enthusiast, because I like you, am in the camp of thinking that we can do things so much better, and this is an opportunity, a tipping point to be able to do it. So thank you very much indeed. It won't surprise you to know that we have a number of questions for you.
I suppose.
Let me kick off with some of them, and I'll group some of them together as well. Yep. So kind of going to go back a little bit in the presentation to go forward. First question here is, you say that AI will craft negotiation positions. That relies heavily on understanding the financial and even social or emotional position of parties. How far away is that really?
Well, I guess it depends on what we're negotiating. If we're negotiating a commercial deal, I don't think it's that far away at all. Honestly, there's technology out there right now that can already help you arrive at a reasonable amount for settling a financial dispute, or for how much a particular business should be purchased for, and so forth. So I don't think you even necessarily need generative AI for that. Quick sidebar on this point. It's important that we use generative AI for the things that it's good at. I've seen a fair bit of people saying, and I think I said this originally at the start before I particularly came to appreciate what generative AI was and wasn't good at. But a lot of people saying, well, you can use it to draft contracts. And the thing of it is that that's actually not a great use of it, because generative AI is very creative. If you say generative AI, draft me 30 contracts, it will draft you 30 different contracts, and they will all be a little bit different each time around. Right? We already have tech for that. We have contract generation, contract automation software. We can use it for that. Generative AI is really useful for the work that is more creative, that is looking at things from a different perspective. And I think that is where you can use it for something which has higher levels of human emotion and sensitivity. It's actually remarkably good at reading that kind of thing, assuming you have prompted it properly, assuming it has access to the sort of information. At this stage, we are, of course, still quite concerned about client confidentiality. We should not be don't upload anything client confidential to ChatGPT-4. I suspect you already all know this, but and even if you're using, if your firm or your local association has the opportunity for you to play with a system like this, make sure it's one that does not take the information you give it and use it to build its engine further, that it's only working in a one-way fashion. But honestly, generative AI programs, large language models, will generate you positions based on the information that you provide them. It's the thing of it is, and it's not a great article by Ethan Mollick, a professor at Wharton University in the USA, makes a great point about this. He said, generative AI, it doesn't act like a computer. It doesn't act like a machine. It acts like a person. It is not a person, to be absolutely clear. There is no generative AI capacity. There is no Skynet here. If you think you are conversing with a person when using generative AI, it's a remarkably effective illusion, but there's no person there. There's no guiding mind. But it reacts like a person when you ask it questions and you give it information. I think if you can give it information about the emotional stakes about something, it'll work. Last thought on that point. I once asked, when I was early trying to get my hang of what generative AI can do, I pretended to be a client saying, my landlord has just evicted me from my tenancy because of da 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 da. What can I do? First thing generative AI says, I'm sorry to hear of your predicament. Right? It's like, that's more empathy than half the lawyers that you would approach are going to give it. Right? So it is really capable of an extraordinary amount, given enough time, given enough information.
We've heard anecdotally that law firms are feeding ChatGPT and the like questions now to see what their clients might actually turn up with when they come to them. So it's really interesting how that interplay is kind of happening as well. I wanted to kind of jump into some of the people-related questions here, I guess, and I'll, if I may, give them to you, kind of a series of them here.
Yeah.
So the first one is focusing on the law firm business model and the valuing of all professionals. So going to that multidisciplinary approach that you were speaking for in terms about before, in terms of solving problems. What do you see as the main blockers for law firms to be able to, I guess, adapt and embrace that collaborative approach, multidisciplinary approach to problem solving?
Yeah. The main blocker is lawyers.
Okay, short answer.
Yeah, the short answer, and very impactful one, is lawyers, for two reasons. Many lawyers have a very strong elitist streak and believe they are not just the smartest people in the room, but they're also the most accomplished professionals in the room. I've heard accountants referred to as bean counters by lawyers more time than I can shake a stick at. And that is very indicative both of the elitism lawyers have, as well as their naivete about what accountants and financial professionals actually do. So it is difficult for many lawyers to see people who are not lawyers as their peers, certainly in a law firm context. That is a very difficult cultural hump to overcome. We will have to get there eventually. The other blocker is the fact that in many jurisdictions, this kind of collaboration is, if not not just discouraged, but actually disallowed by regulation. Regulation is largely run by lawyers and judges. That, I think, we have a better chance of changing. There is a move afoot here in one jurisdiction in Canada to change the regulation of lawyers and move it away from being controlled by the legal profession towards a much more balanced governance approach. I am all for that. I am doing what I can to encourage it. So we have better chance in that regard. What we really have to do is start the work of normalization, of helping lawyers to understand and to see there are many people, lawyers and people who are not lawyers, other professionals, technicians, ordinary, normal people, as I like to call non-lawyers. And they have so much to offer, so much to give. It's part of the same problem with diversity. Lawyers are just not accustomed to dealing with people and working with people with whom they have regarded as outsiders or externalities or others. Again, something we can start changing with the legal education system anytime now would also be very useful.
Absolutely. And I've got two follow-up questions on those points as well. But for the moment, just staying with legal regulators, what's going to help them make that shift? Because it's a big one. And we often hear, as you've mentioned as well, that is the blocker to being able to do things, to be more innovative almost with law firm business models and the like.
Yeah.
How are they going to adapt? What's the starting point, or what have you seen or encouraged as the starting point for regulators?
Yeah, great question. One aspect of it is changing the people who are making the decisions, because where in jurisdictions where it is and always has been lawyers, 80, 90% of your boards of directors, then they make lawyer-centric decisions, which whether they like it or not, whether they believe it or not, whether they are meant to or not, effectively entrench lawyers' advantages further in the market. It may be out of the kindest of motives, but the end result is the same. So I think that is part of it. Part of it also, though, and this doesn't necessarily, and changing the governance structure of regulators is extremely difficult. But what you can also do is help to shift and change the particular focus that they, the mandate that they are given. One of the things I'm pushing very hard is this idea of the public interest. What is in the public interest? When you talk to most regulators, they say, my job is to protect the public. And I don't think that is accurate. Protection is very paternalistic. Protection is very, oh, you poor little client, poor little ordinary person. You don't know what's best for you. Let us take care of that for you. Again, we need to empower people. We need to recognize that they are adults, that they can and are entitled to make their own decisions. So part of it is for us to recognize that a big part of the public interest is allowing the public to decide for itself what it believes it's in its best interests. One of my bugaboos about regulators trying to stop unlicensed legal professionals, at a certain point, I say, look, if a person decides that they can't afford a lawyer, but they're going to hire someone who's not a lawyer who can get them a little bit of help for less money, what's it for us to say? You know, they are two consenting adults in the legal marketplace. Let them make that call. And I guess a third piece of it, in addition to the idea of changing the governance and emphasizing focus on the public interest, is, and again, this is helped by bringing lawyers a little out of the main focus, but change the approach from risk to opportunity. We know what the risks are. We know how things can go wrong. How could things go right? How could we grow? How could we expand? Again, this is why the idea of grow the client kind of surprises lawyers sometimes. It's like, well, that's not my job. My job is to keep the client out of trouble, or to get the client out of trouble. Okay, it can be. It's part of what you do, but maybe you could do more. Maybe trusted advisor means more than just hauling your rear end out of the fire. Maybe it means building a better heating system so that there is no fire. I'm really stretching that metaphor, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, there's multiple ways to do it. They are largely institutional, but they're largely attitudinal. I come back again to normalization. The more we talk about it, the more we push for it, the more we try to make this something, we just get people to discuss it and even to defend it. I think that's the way that we go forward on this. There's nothing inevitable about our current system. We're going to find over the next 10 years, we're going to look back 10 years from now and say, I had no idea it could all change that fast and that completely.
Let me flip this for one of the questions that we have here, which is, I guess, almost the perfect world where folks are now able to effectively self-represent themselves. They're able to get access to the sort of tools that you've been speaking about. How will the courts manage that? I mean, and obviously we're talking about some sort of overhaul here, but
Yeah.
leading up to that position, because it's already happening now,
Mhm.
that we're seeing folks
Oh
obviously
yeah.
taking advantage of the tools and using them themselves.
Yeah.
How are they going to manage that? What
Yeah.
advice, thoughts do you have there?
It's a great question, and we've already seen a little bit of the problem that's going to be created here. Very quick story. During the pandemic, courts in Texas responded faster than other places, and they went online. They did a lot of Zoom things and so forth, and they found that, and they thought, okay, this will make access to justice better. It actually made it worse. Not because people weren't taking advantage, but because people were. All of a sudden, people who were getting default judgments entered against them because they couldn't get to the courthouse were showing up. And now these hearings are taking longer. And now the backlog is actually growing. And I use that as an example to access to justice advocates as to be careful what you wish for, right? You could get access to justice. What happens if you succeed? Right? What happens?
Yeah,
The courts can't handle what we give them now, and we want to give them more. So I think the answer to this, for myself, I mean, yeah, could we use more courts? Yes, we sure could, and we could modernize them. If you look at parts of Britain where it is a national embarrassment, how the court system, the courts are literally falling apart in front of our eyes. Yes, there is an upgrading and an expansion that is needed and required, but we also need to look well beyond the idea of courts. It doesn't have to be a court and a judge who is appointed according to a particular system, and it's all very much built in the Constitution. Look here in Canada, back in British Columbia, the Civil Resolution Tribunal has been a massive success. It is not a court. It is an online dispute resolution system, but it is mostly about, again, informing people, meeting them where they are, giving them options to resolve disputes. It is extraordinarily successful. It has approval ratings in the 80 to 90% range. I don't think you could find 8% of people who would say they approved of their experience in the courts. We don't have to restrict ourselves just to the dispute resolution mechanisms that we have always had. We can have as many as we want. John Maynard Keynes, you can afford any solution you want, right? It's only a question of what do you want to actually afford? What do you want to build? We don't need to limit ourselves to the institutions and the framework we've always had. I know I sound like a babbling revolutionary here. I'm not really trying to. But again, I come back to the idea that, honestly, Terry, this feels like the moment. This
yeah,
feels like the opportunity coming our way. The crisis has never been this bad. The opportunities that are being presented to us here by all this change have never been this wide ranging. It just feels like this is it. And I really want us to grab this opportunity and run with it as hard as we can.
absolutely. I think we're in the position of needing to break and rebuild, just break out in every
Yeah.
possible way. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more
Yeah. Yeah.
question before we, if I may, before we close.
Please.
And it's flipping it now to kind of looking, I guess, sitting where we are now and putting the client focus or lens on it. And the question is, what do you think are some of the early benefits clients will see in relation to the client experience aspects that you were speaking to earlier?
Well, the easiest ones to access will be the level of knowledge empowerment. Again, I mean, right now, if you go to ChatGPT 4 and ask it questions about the law, it's going to give you pretty good answers. And if you are an ordinary person looking for an answer or solution, it gives you a head start. It might even give you a really good head start. It might even give you something. If you went, I am not advocating this, but if you as a person went in and said, I live in New South Wales and I need a simple will in which I give half my money to my wife and half my money to my two kids. Create one that will stand up in a court. It'll give you something, and chances are it'll be good enough. It's not going to be a thing of beauty, and it might have a couple of holes in it, but it's going to be pretty good. So it's going to, right? It's going to raise the floor, right? We spend all our time in law trying to lower the ceiling, or trying to bring more suppliers closer to people. We can raise the floor instead and give people more access to those tools. But you know what else it can do? It can do the creative stuff as well. So a client could say, I need to negotiate with my lawyer. I need to figure out how much that I should pay for this, or what they'd like you to say, or what have you. Clients can role play lawyers just as easily as lawyers can role play clients, right? So there are so many dimensions that we have just opened a door to a massive room, and we're just starting to flick on a few of the lights. We don't know how big this room is yet. There might be a massive bank of lights here that we don't even see yet. This is what makes it exciting. The use cases, they they are manifold. The trick to it is just get in there, start flicking on lights, see what shows up. I think this is the moment of experimentation to figure out what we can do with it. I think, among other things, I think it's a ton of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. Fantastic presentation, fantastic answers to those questions, Jordan. We haven't been able to get to all of them, but I know that you're open to folks reaching out to you, and they can find you
Absolutely.
in a bunch of different places, your website, on social media, etc. And I would certainly encourage them to do that. We hope, everyone, that you've enjoyed the session. It will be available on video in the Centre's resource hub, which is free, and also as an episode of our podcast, the Legalpreneurs Sandbox. If you'd like to receive information and updates about the work of the Centre, please do follow us on LinkedIn and all other social media. And please do the same with Jordan. His writing is exceptional, it's prolific, and it's very focused on the sort of things that we've been speaking about today, and many others, but you'll find lots of amazing resources there as well. Jordan, delighted. Thank you very much again.
My pleasure, Terry. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.